first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem.
That's the main thing that I'm really appreciative of. And in the meantime, I've actually got grandkids watching this feed, and I've never really done this. So
Oh, okay.
I could have all the adults in the world watching, and it wouldn't really mean much pressure. But having the grandkids on is important for a couple reasons. We've been studying worldview with the grandkids. We've been talking about the difference between a pagan worldview and a Christian worldview.
Right.
And then as we bring this about, as we talk about For the Temple, we covered a lot of ground last time. And so before I forget, if you like the worldview stuff and you like wholesome Christian entertainment, we've got a nice deal going on at givetheadventure.com. So go over there if you like that kind of stuff. Yeah, we're practically giving this stuff away. And in some cases, we actually are giving it away. If there's some families and some folks that really don't have the money, we're kind of giving it away. If you don't have all of the money, we've got it worked out so you can do a 3-pay or something too. But
nice.
That's all over at givetheadventure.com. But the main thing we're talking about, and what I was mentioning about the grandkids, is we've been talking about worldview, and we've been talking about the idea of what the difference between a pagan worldview is and a Christian worldview.
Right.
And as you and I have been discussing off camera and during our attempts maybe to connect with each other, it really, in our story, it's startling because you've got this Roman idea. If they look at the world, they've got a certain way of looking at seeing the world and seeing morality and seeing knowledge and seeing what does wisdom look like to a Roman? What does knowledge look like to a Roman? What does the ethics and the morals of right and wrong look like to a Roman?
Right.
So our two main characters, as we discussed last time, and we have that podcast. We didn't do a Facebook Live, but we have that podcast over on my website, BillHyde.com, HEID, BillHyde.com, and you can listen to that. Also got some articles posted on Roman way of life and so versus Christian way of life. So let's talk a little bit about this stuff. I know you got to go, and here we've been working on this all morning, and we finally had a chance to connect. But we'll do this. I think the next time we'll get this right, and I think it'll work out fantastic. So I appreciate everybody that kind of hung in there with us and waited for this. But let's talk about
For the Temple.
For the Temple.
That looks awesome.
It's a great story. You should get it, and
I should.
And no, we really, we appreciate your writing here and your writing style.
Thank you,
Darby, and the way that we brought this. You did a wonderful job, and I think it's just a good thing for us to be able to go into the writing side of this because these characters had to be developed with a worldview. And we had a couple we were going to talk about today for the sake of the listeners. Let's jump into that a little bit.
Yeah, we were talking about, like you said, the difference between the two worldviews. And actually it's more, at the time, it's more Jewish versus the Roman. And the Christianity comes in later in the story. But we had these Jewish zealots who are such a big part of the story, and John, our main character, becomes one of them. But he's a bit different from the rest of them because he's been raised learning from at his father's feet the history of Judaism, of what God has done for their people, for their nation, through 2,000 plus years, really. And he doesn't, he becomes a zealot and a leader of this group, but he never really has it in his head that, all right, I am going to get this group of people together and we're going to go kill the Romans and we're going to drive them out. And that's not the way he's thinking, because he probably, he may have actually believed that commandment that says thou shalt not murder. And later on in the story, when he has to kill somebody, it makes a difference in his life. But the zealots, by and large, were not like John. They grouped together in the mountains, and then they went and they attacked the Romans or the whoever was causing problems, and they really they had a serious mindset to kill and drive these people out. And as we know, Rome was a huge empire with a lot of people behind it. And, you know,
pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Pretty big, a lot of muscle there.
Yeah. You kill 10 of them and you get 100 more. So what good did it do you? You know, John has a very different way of dealing with them, which is more to annoy them and aggravate them, and hopefully, you know, they'll get tired of this itch that they have and just leave. But that doesn't exactly work either.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the Romans really never want to go, do they? Once they come in and set up shop, so to speak, they don't want to go, and that's part of their worldview as well.
Exactly.
Because, you know, the whole Pax Romana, this big idea of their idea of salvation is through Roman conquering. So right away you got an interesting dichotomy there, because you've got salvation in the Hebrew sense of being delivered by the Lord God Jehovah.
Right.
And and the spiritual side of that, and then you've got in the Roman side, you don't really have the spiritual side of that. You've got kind of you could call it, you know, the muscle side or the force side.
Right.
And
right.
really the only tools they're playing with because of their worldview.
Yeah, yeah. And the Romans had their gods too, but they were usually little statues that they kept on the shelf, and, you know, they prayed to them, or it was, you know, someone living up in the hills someplace, and, you know, a lot of similarity to the Greek gods, who, you know, we look at it and it's obvious for us to say, well, they're not gods. They're, you know, hunks of stone that never did a powerful thing in their life, or anything in their life for that matter. And you know, Israel had this history of a God that, you know, at one point in the nation was a pillar of fire in their midst, and a pillar of smoke in their midst. And you know, when they went to the temple, well, they weren't allowed into the Holy of Holies, but Jehovah resided there. And there, you know, it wasn't a matter of seeing him, but it was a matter of knowing that he was present. And for the most part, they did that. And then sinned hideously in his presence. But, you know, the Romans didn't have anything like that. It was, you know, all right, Jupiter, help me out here. And if Jupiter didn't help you out, you could just say, well, he must have been doing something else that day. And
he was busy.
He was busy.
Jupiter had some other things to do.
Yeah. As Elijah said about Baal.
What's he doing?
Yeah.
He's using the restroom. Being polite. So you touched on an important part, because that's a dramatic worldview difference between the Romans, and this is classical thought, as you had mentioned. The Romans and the Greeks basically had the same point of view. You had quite a few gods because you had quite a few needs. If you were you're going to take a boat ride someplace, there was a god for that. If you needed fertility in your fields, there was a god for that. If you needed love, there was a god for that. And so it's really based more, that worldview, the classical worldview in that sense, is really based more on, you know, what the needs of the individual are. Me wants something.
Right.
And then so I'm going to go pay tribute to whatever God is in charge of that venue.
Right, right.
And as you said, it's about where it ends. And those gods really aren't personal in any meaningful sense.
No.
And I think you end up, you have some great writers giving them personalities, but they really were just little, you know, not gods, but more like guys that, like us, that just were a little stronger is all.
Right.
They were lustful and prideful and deceitful and committed all kinds of atrocities that we would never even mention on a you know, podcast like this on Facebook Live. We couldn't. It's so hideous and so evil, we won't even talk about what they did.
Yeah.
But it's a startling contrast, because the Greeks and the Romans are going to, from the ground up, they're going to believe that the universe is all made out of the same stuff.
Yeah.
They're not going to believe in this separation. We would call it a creature-creator distinction, right? They're not going to believe that God's outside the box, right? That the Romans believe that their gods are inside this universe, and I joke with my grandkids that there's two circle people and one circle people. And one circle people think everything's inside that circle. So the stuff you're going to grab and make up your gods from, they came from the exact same stuff that you're made of.
Yeah.
In that world, our world, the Hebrew world even, that's a different thing. You have a transcendent God from way outside.
Right.
A personal God.
Right.
Not in this impersonalism that exists so much. And that created, I think that helped to shape a lot of the carnage too, for the Roman efforts. Because a Roman, Darby, could be moral. You can say he's a moral man. We would maybe say that in our context, but a Roman could be moral just by living a Roman life. They could take a young baby if they didn't want a baby. The father was the head of the house, and they had a very patriarchal society. You could just go dump that baby over a rock wall and leave that baby to exposure. That did not make you immoral.
Right.
That made you Roman.
Right.
The fact that you exercised your will and made that decision, that made you Roman. So we're talking about some very different sides. I think theologically we would say, and I'll shut up here and let you kind of comment, but I think theologically we'd have to say, however, that we learn from the book of Romans that they still know God. There's still a sense in which there's this created order that they know it, but the big crucial difference is they suppress it in unrighteousness.
Exactly.
And so that's what you get. There's a kind of a knowledge, and that's why you can get Romans with sort of soft-hearted. When you can get a Titus, it's kind of trying to say, really? Do you really want, They're not all as bad as they could be. By the same token, not all the Hebrews are as good as they can be.
Right.
We would call in our language sanctified. Do you want to comment on that as far as our characters and our stories concerned?
Yeah, I think that we always try to make our characters as complex as we can within your audience's understanding, and I think the audience has a good understanding. Titus, historically, Titus was really he was a bad guy. He was a pretty bad guy, and did a lot of damage to Israel and to the Jewish people. He was there as the temple was destroyed, and essentially, he told his soldiers as they looked from the Mount of Olives at the Temple Mount, he said, "You see all that gold over there?" And they said, "Yeah." And he said, "All that's yours if you want it. Go get it." And they had to burn the entire temple to get that gold, or the gold melted, and then they tore it apart to get the gold out of it. And now that a lot of that financed the Arch of Titus in Rome, where it tells the story of the sacking of the temple from a very different point of view than the Jewish people would tell it, of course. In our story, Henty used Titus as a character who was this much nicer, in that he didn't kill John when he had a chance to, and he swore an oath to him, because John didn't kill him either, and he swore an oath to John that he would not be the one to destroy the temple. And in the story, and there may be some truth to it. I know Henty did some research on his subjects.
Yes.
So quite a bit, in fact. So there may be some truth to this version as well, that he was really not the one who sacked the temple and just destroyed everything. But he was there when it happened. He was the general in charge of it. And if you talk to a Jewish person today about Titus, you're gonna get the bad feelings, and because again he was in charge of the army that destroyed their temple, and that temple was the center of Judaism for them. It was in their holy city. It was where God resided, in the Holy of Holies there. So Titus may or may not have been someone who really knew what he was doing while he was in command of these troops. But the reason the greater part of the story is not about Titus. It's about John interacting with these different sects of zealots who couldn't agree on anything, were starving their own people, were robbing their own people, causing damage, and in the story even blasphemed in the temple. And so John has to decide, after he's dedicated his life, as his father raised him to do, after he's dedicated his life to fighting for the temple, is the temple what I need to be fighting for? And as Christians, we can look at what Jesus said, and he said, do you swear by the temple, or do you swear by the gold in the temple? What is the temple, just a building, or is that just the house that houses something far more valuable and more important? And a Christian would say, yeah, the temple is just a building, and whether God was still residing in it at that point is probably not up for debate. But we see in Ezekiel, he tells a very poignant story about the Spirit of God leaving the temple, but that was the second temple, and now we're dealing with Herod's temple. And did it ever come back? I'm not a theologian enough to answer that question. Well, you may have insight.
That's really good, though. And I would say it's important to train our kids up with this idea of what is worth fighting for.
Right.
What hill are we willing to die on? And there are those hills. And some of those hills are made up of, in our minds at least, sometimes we want to make those hills up, and those hills end up being merely traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't kind of go through to the actual real reason. They're kind of more of almost an impediment to faith and belief.
Yeah.
And as a crutch rather than, and certainly the Sanhedrin, I'm not sure, we talked about this last time, folks should go back and listen to the other podcasts, but the Sanhedrin didn't believe in God. And so really they believed in the formal mechanisms at some point, right? And that's about as far as it went. But inside this, well, first to comment on why the Romans were mad, and just you could go back a little ways, and I have all the history in front of me, but it is important to realize, how did Jerusalem get built up? Where did the money come up for this place that was really kind of a Palestinian show place? It was a beautiful place.
Right.
Where'd that money come from? That money didn't come just from the Hebrews. A lot of that money came from Rome. And Rome had owed some favors to Herod's, either father or grandfather, I can't remember, and I think we mentioned this last time.
Probably both.
Had sent some troops in to actually save, I think it might have been Julius Caesar before you had a Caesar, to save him, and perhaps even saved his life. And so there was kind of a debt that was incurred in some sense there. People don't realize, well, you mean Herod had troops and he could send him in and help Caesar by all means, and kind of rescued him at one point. And so you had a little bit of this, and you had a little bit of tax money from the empire diverted towards building the temple.
Right.
And so I could see the Romans saying, worldview-wise, hey, what's going on here? We've done nothing but give you your freedom more than any other people that we've, sort of subjugated or whatever.
Yeah.
We've always given you your freedom. We've given you a special place. We've helped you build this thing up. And now you turn on us like you don't know who we are, and like you're mad at us.
Yeah.
And you could certainly see as a pagan idea, that's what they were thinking. And that, you talk about people like Vespasian and Titus, and the average Roman might have thought that, but these guys are in a position of pragmatic power. And you mentioned Titus, Darby, as a pragmatic Roman, worldview-wise.
Yeah.
Whether he thinks it's good or thinks it's bad, he's going to do what's best in his mind, that he's been trained up. And this starts when he was a kid.
Right.
This starts with his mom. This starts with his pedagogos, right? This starts way back, and where he's learning the worldview of whatever is right for the empire is right for me.
Yeah.
And so that's how the worldview decisions were made.
Yeah.
And the problem that you're talking about that is really such a great discussion, the problem is the zealots, in attempting to push back at Titus, basically believe the same thing. And what's ever right,
Yeah.
in this rebellion, that's what I'm going to do. And neither side really had a standard or a yardstick whereby they could measure what the reason for the fight would be.
Right.
And isn't that crazy? When you have two sides, they've lost total control or total any idea about why they're there.
Right. And in the case of the zealots, there were more than two sides because there were these different groups who all had their own reasons for, doing what they wanted to do, and didn't care who they stepped on. And I wonder, just as I was writing, it sort of occurred to me the question, I wonder if any of these guys who were like the leaders of the zealots, I wonder if any of them ever thought that they were the Messiah, and it was all these things that were prophesied about the Messiah were gonna fall on them, and I think that there were plenty of people who went off out into the wilderness and gathered an army, and were ready to try and drive the Romans out. What was their reason for doing it? I mean, clearly the Roman ideas, the different gods and multiple gods and everything really flew in the face of the Jewish beliefs and traditions that there is only one God, and they know him. They know him in a much more personal way. And he spoke to Abraham and he spoke to Isaac and the fathers of their nation, and they knew these Roman guys weren't talking to the same God, and it just makes me wonder, like, okay, we got to get rid of these guys. We'll have God in charge again, maybe, but then they go about it in a way that is so completely different from the way Jesus came at it, and who we would see as the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies, and it's almost no wonder that they couldn't accept Jesus as their Messiah, because it was such a completely different idea. That's kind of a long answer.
That's a great point, because a long and a really good one. But you remember, Jesus had tremendous patience even with respect to Roman military men.
Mm-hmm.
So, we all know the story of the centurion.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not sure that Jesus necessarily saw the Romans any different than he saw, his Jewish compadres in that sense.
Right.
I think he saw them as made in God's image and with some sin.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the worldview. And then, so there's room for compassion. There's room for the idea of who's going to be God's people.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Jesus made a lot of comments on it. So that's a great point, because you got a radically different worldview there than either side.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the side we're called to be on. And yet at the same time, you always have decisions to make. We've got a lot of military men. We've got people, that will watch this, that have husbands or fathers that have served. And so what are we saying here? That you can't ever serve? Like, what did our founding fathers believe, right? They had the same situation. Should I stay or should I go? Do we rebel? And what's the basis upon which we rebel?
Right.
What's the basis upon which we would try to overthrow something?
Right.
And that's probably fodder for a different time.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole extended play version. But
about how the symbol of the American Revolution is the Liberty Bell, and the symbol of the French Revolution is the guillotine, and how what a difference those two were. I'm not trying to.
And underneath the Liberty Bell, you have a line from Leviticus.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that everybody understands where freedom comes from.
Right.
and liberty and jubilee and rest comes from the Lord. Totally different concept.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I I don't know. I think about this story that we're hoping to do this year, that we're planning on doing this year, about one of the 28th, which is sort of a follow up to In the Reign of Terror. You know, how did what happened here affect what's going to happen in 40 years, and not even 40 years, 30 some years, and it's interesting the way that carries through the. How the French Revolution didn't solve all their problems, and it didn't create a new nation. It just created different problems for the children to deal with a little while later on. But here we go.
Yeah,
This is like all of our conversations. We end up talking.
Yeah, no, that's a good place, and maybe because you have to go. Maybe that's a good place to end this one.
Okay.
And I think what's the there's a lot of little conclusions here, but I think one of the really good thoughts here that we have to convey to moms and dads raising kids, and you just touched on it, no matter where it is, whether it's a war, something as macroscopic as the Romans crushing Jerusalem, all the way down to your next door neighbor playing his music a little bit louder or whatever. The idea always is, if I could get rid of X, then everything's going to be all right. We could write a song about that, right? We make it through the winter. If we just get rid of this person, if we just went to a different church, if we just went to this place or that place, and there are times and places to make those calls, and that's not what this particular one we're talking about, obviously. But to see the world, to see sin, and sort of, if we're going to teach our kids, the best place to sort of go back and examine things is maybe in our own minds and hearts first, because it's not unlike the drug problem. People say if you just get rid of meth, then you've solved this problem. And you haven't really solved the problem, because you have human beings made in God's image, Darby, with holes in their lives.
Yeah.
And if you take the meth away from them, which you probably should, but if you do that, they're going to try to fill it up with something else.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. There's just this nonstop effort, and the only solution is Jesus Christ.
Right.
The only solution for any of these problems is Jesus Christ. And
Amen.
That's the answer to the Roman. Amen. That's the answer to the Roman issue, and what happened through that. It's the answer to all of our problems. But when we talk about worldview, we're talking about God's word speaking to all areas of life, not just what look like churchy things on Sunday, but politics, the Romans, how we treat other people. Believe me when I tell you, God's word, and folks, most of our listeners know this, but God's word speaks to these areas.
Yeah.
And if we don't listen, we're going to find ourselves in trouble. Hopefully not the same kind of trouble Jerusalem had in
70 AD.
I hate to commission you to write the story of what happened to America and have it end being something similar to that. That's scary to me even to say that. But
as a futuristic story, or as what's already happened?
Well, you could write it, but it's already happened in a sense. But that's a good point, because it probably, what happened to Jerusalem didn't happen overnight. We know that there's these roller coaster kind of ebbs and flows of their faith, and we're at kind of a bottom spot in many ways here too. I mean, as we kind of close it out, what are your final thoughts about that?
I've just been thinking. You mentioned before how a Roman not wanting a child, and this particular baby, taking it and throwing it over the wall and leaving it to exposure or to animals or whatever. I mean, 2,000 years later, look at your news feed. Is it any better today? Is it any more moral? Is it you can say it's worse, but even if it's exactly the same, we're still in a horrible spot, and and that's just one issue. I mean, there's so much sin out there, and I'm just shocked in the last 10 years. I'm starting to sound like I'm 100 years old, but in the last 10 years, the things that we tolerate or accept now as a society. Where 20 years ago it was fodder for sitcom jokes, and 40 years ago people wouldn't even talk about it. It was not something that comes up in conversation. So has the glory left, in quotes, the temple of America? What is the temple of America? But has the glory departed from here? And what is a Christian to do at that point, or at this point that we're at right now? We need to, as a nation, we need to be on our knees praying for our leaders, whether you voted for them or not, whether you like them or not. We do need to be praying, and we need to be crying out to God for forgiveness, repentance and mercy. And I don't know what God's plan is, but I don't know that I want to see all of it.
Well, let's bring that up. Let's grab some of this conversation and where we're at now. Let's bring this up and develop some of the other particularities of the story the next time, and we can mix some of that in with what we're doing.
Yeah,
because it's important, and I think Dostoevsky always said, you want a better world, clean up your garage. And I think the reason Americans like to follow national politics is that it's a little bit, Darby, like a bunch of Jews during this period of time just getting mad at the Romans and blaming them for everything.
right.
Certainly there's blame, but we are now a nation of I'm going to call it blame throwers, right? We accumulate injustices, and we can't wait for an opportunity to blame somebody.
Yeah.
And all you got to do in national politics is turn the TV on and look at both sides of the aisle, just chucking this blame thing back and forth at each other. But at the end of the day, I think another message that I would like, whether it's my kids, my grandkids, our listeners, whoever, to know is you can't get out of it by blaming someone like a president.
Right.
That's never been the political action for America. But it does serve that purpose, and that's why the evening news talking heads, I think, not unlike the stuff we're talking about, it gives folks a way to take the pressure off of them, yes, Christians included, and just point at our leaders, no matter what side of the aisle, again, that you're on, and say, he's the problem. If we just get rid of this person, no matter what it is, then it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Instead of looking in the mirror like the old Negro spiritual and saying, it's not my mother or my father, my brother, my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. I don't think we go anywhere until we can all start doing that.
Yeah.
And be a little bit, not morbid introspectively, not look, and kind of, I think our Puritans, as much as I love the Puritans, they kind of beat each other up, maybe themselves up a little too much. But I mean, I think we just got to go back and say, how can I change? Because the world's not going to change.
Yeah.
I got to change first. I got to be more biblical, more centered that way.
Right.
And I'll give you the final comment, and then I'll close it out, and we can pick this up next time.
Well, in a political sense, I've always believed that our politicians just reflect society in a way. And if there is a knucklehead elected, or a pagan elected, or a deviant elected, or something like that, it just reflects what we have allowed society to turn into. Like you said, and like the Jewish nation in 70 AD, they need to turn back to God. And, or earlier than 70 AD. 70 AD was, that was the tipping point. And it's, it was almost 2,000 years of struggle for the Jewish people. It still is. I mean, still over 2,000 years. But, during the last week of Jesus's life, he goes to the temple and he talks to the people and he says, okay, I'm giving you a choice. It's, you're going to follow these guys, or you're going to follow me. And I'm telling you right now, you know, this is important. This is your moment right here, essentially. He doesn't come out and say it just like that, but they decide that Jesus makes too much demands of them, and they follow the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then they, you know, they crucify him, and he triumphantly resurrects. But that was the end of it. You know, Tuesday of the Passion Week, and that was the decision. And you know, we need to make that decision on a personal level, you know, right now, and you know, choose now who you will serve. And it's not easy. It's not always easy, and it's not always fun. But you know, your nation, again in quotes, depends on it completely. So,
yep, our kids, the next generation, all depends on not just what we say, but probably more importantly on what we do. And I was thinking, as you said that, just to kind of close us out, Darby, I was thinking, you know, coming into town, if we were to sort of liken this to something today, Jesus would have had a ton of Facebook fans, right?
Yeah.
On his way in. Lots of hosannas.
Yep.
He wouldn't have had likes. He would have had hosannas,
yeah.
right? That's what Facebook would have been like. But then it didn't take very long, did it?
No.
For all of his followers, all of his likes and all of his hosannas to be disengaged as friends.
Yeah.
And even his closest friends had to dislike. Is there a dislike? I know you can dislike people on Facebook, right? You can get up. I think even Peter
unfollow him. Yeah.
had the dislike button on, right? He what? I don't, you know, you must be talking about a different page. I mean, I got a lot of friends on my Facebook page, but I don't know this guy. Right. So, you know, that moment comes to all of us when we have to kind of step up and say, this is the Christ, right? And we can't be afraid to do that, because God is in charge and of our lives, and he will be faithful even when we're not. And I think that's a great place to close. Again, one more time, Darby, I'll tell everybody, just if you like Worldview stuff, we're practically giving a lot of the stuff away over at givetheadventure.com, all of our stuff, and even get a free copy of this one, which is a Darby Kern adaptation, and well done. Our friend Todd Bastide said it's the best story that we've ever done, so I'd encourage people to kind of check that out as well. And
for sure,
Darby, thank you so much. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you hanging in there with me as we try to figure out technology stuff. And then I also appreciate anybody that, you know, hung around, and it was kind of like I was Ahab, you know, stabbing at this big white whale on Facebook, trying to make it work. You know,
was I the whale?
I didn't know how to do it. What's that?
Was I the whale?
No, you were.
Oh, okay.
You were not the whale.
Oh, okay.
You were not the whale. But tune in next time to see who the whale is. Oh. I'm Bill Hyde, and Darby Kern. Darby, thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll be in touch soon, and we'll do this again.
Anytime.
So thank you very much.
Anytime.
All right, thanks. God bless.
Bye. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.